Alrighty, episode 2 of the This Week in Overwatch League podcast is a go, and wow, we had a pretty interesting week, huh? Week 3 of the Overwatch League was chaotic, to say the least. So many interesting and unexpected and exciting results hitting us all in the face at once. So many storylines have come out of this week alone, it's almost overwhelming in a sense. There's so much to unpack. Where do we even start with all of the stuff that went down? And that's on top of the fact that there's even more stuff to be looking forward to heading into week 4, with headlines, how teams perform from here, who can turn it around, who can stay on top, what's going to happen with tournament play, whose life is on the line, who's in the best possible shape. There's a lot to go over in that regard. But I think we're going to start off with recapping week 3, because like I just said, a lot went down, and we got to digest this and take it step by step and process everything that has happened to us, as this might be the least consistent we have been through 3 weeks in the Overwatch League since hero pools were a thing. Like, really, that's how I feel, as mostly I'd say it feels like only a few teams in the league are consistently remaining either at the tippity top or at the way bottom, and you know who I mean. It's pretty obvious with how they've played so far. Other than that, everyone else is in this big loop, this big mixture where we really don't know what's going on. And I mean that for both regions, the East and the West. There's a ton of talking points this week, so many amazing headlines, but I really wanted to start off by going into some detail with the Vegas versus London series. I talked a lot about Vegas and their interesting situation in my video from last night. If you want to check out my criticisms for some of the crazy stuff that happened with them recently, definitely check it out. I went all in on them. I didn't hold back, but that's actually not what I intend to talk about in this podcast episode. I actually more so wanted to talk about the interesting stuff that happened during the game itself and the entertainment value that it surprisingly brought to the table. Because when you see that Luke Mino is in at DPS and Avala, their general manager, is in at support, you'd expect an absolute blowout in favor of London. But we actually had one decent map in this series. And that's on top of the fact that Luke Mino was mad entertaining from start to finish in the series with all the different heroes he played, and surprisingly, looking decent on the Hangzhou and making some good strategies work out. He played like 5 or 6 different heroes in this series, which is pretty sick for a guy that you'd always see on support. But also you have Avala kind of holding her own at support, which was a bit shocking. She is a GM level player, but she hasn't touched the game in a week, supposedly, and it's not exactly like she's Overwatch League caliber. So it was kind of cool to see her at least do okay on Kiriko. It was a big surprise for sure, and again, very entertaining. So the series started off how you'd expect, though, right? London absolutely steamrolling on Lijiang. It's not close. I don't think they lost a single fight, or maybe one the entire set. It was easy peasy. But then King's Row happens, and that's where the entertainment value shoots way up. And it's not just because of the fact that we're seeing some off-rolling and a general manager playing in the Overwatch League. It's because of how it happened. Vegas nearly took this map. It went to extra rounds. It took London extra rounds to take this thing. And I don't know if that says more about London and their situation or Vegas. I'm not too sure. I think both teams have some very weird talking points. The fact that it took London that long is maybe a little scary. Maybe they weren't trying that hard. Maybe they're experimenting. But with how they've looked so far this year, that really may not be the case. And I don't know how many excuses we can make for them. But then again, on the side of Vegas, it's how is this going to be your jolt with all these random swaps? How is this going to be the thing that shows you the most life we've seen basically all season? I don't really know how that works, but King's Row was fun. Luke Mino was surprisingly good on the Hangzhou, and Avala did her thing on the Kiriko, but Luke Mino was probably the star of the show. I was watching this live with my chat on my co-stream, #ad, and he was actually nailing some pretty decent shots. If you missed out, here's just a quick highlight for you of what he was doing. So hits a nice shot into Landon here. Ends up surviving this little duel with Lethal, and then he ends up finding another pick to win this fight. Not something you'd expect from a support player. And he found a bunch of random picks like that, and ultimately helped Vegas finish the map on their attack. They couldn't close it out, but you'd expect that. They're not supposed to be in this situation to begin with. but still a pretty fun map regardless, and Luke Mino in general was very entertaining. Like, I talked about all the heroes he played and the fact that he did good on the Hangzhou, but he also broke out some random strategies that worked well, too. He was all over the place. He provided great entertainment value, and I think him and Avala both deserve a shout-out for moving into roles they shouldn't be in to begin with. I mean, obviously, Eternal, like, you have to blame Avala to a certain extent, as well as that team for only having 5 players and being in this weird spot. But I think they did what they could under very weird circumstances and made it not as awful as it could have been. There was this one other highlight I wanted to quickly find, just to, again, show you the fun stuff that Luke Mino did in this series. It'll be on Vegas's attack, if I can find it. He broke out the Junkrat. Like, this is what I mean. He played, like, Genji, Bastion, Hangzhou, and then this Junkrat strategy was, not something you'd expect. Just goes over the roof, fires a couple of grenades, and ends up finding a pick. Like, this was the jolt of life that Vegas needed. The guy off-rolling gave them the jolt of life. And that happened throughout most of the series, and he was kind of one of the reasons they were in this match slightly. Not that they stood much of a chance, and, they really didn't outside of King's Row, but still, he gave them the jolt of life they needed, and I'm pretty proud of him for that. And I give him a big round of applause for stepping into this role. It's weird that Malthol had internet issues. Don't really know what's up with that. But yeah, Vegas gave us a fun series with London, and later on with the NYXL too, so I guess that's another interesting talking point we can go over. Because both of these teams were very weird in this series as well. And this one, Vegas, they kind of returned to their normal state. They had Malthol on his internet again. Everything was fine. Luke Mino was back on support again. They didn't have their general manager in. And they gave New York a decent fight. But I don't know if it's more so because they played okay or if because New York were bad. I'm leaning more towards the second thing I just said. Because New York were not just playing very sloppily, making a lot of big mistakes, but they're going through this process of slowly incorporating Fitz into the support role, and that's something we got to talk about. That is extremely weird. That is the reason Vegas had a chance at life, between the dumb mistakes and Fitz playing support. Why on earth is Changun playing Fitz on support when he has 4 different support players? Like, I understand they're not the greatest support rotation in the world, but why are you taking your DPS player and putting him on support when you literally have 4 of them? I know you're not necessarily in a position where you wanted to utilize, like, Halo or what's her name, Annie Yoon. They're mostly there to be on the academy team and be two-way players, if you will. But you might as well give them a shot instead of just playing Fitz on support. It really didn't work out that well. Fitz support was not it. He played some Brigitte, he played some Ana, and it was hella mediocre, like you'd expect because, he's a DPS player. He shouldn't be there. His play was riddled with mistakes, both in this Vegas game and against the San Francisco Shock, which we'll talk about a bit later. And this ultimately gave Vegas a chance to potentially make this series go the distance. They did well on Blizzard World. It came down to, like, the last couple of fights, which is crazy. But, they finished off that map. They nearly took Junkertown. It was close. They just couldn't get the job done there. And if they had done the Junkertown deed and they'd gotten the job done against Fitz, this would have went to a map 5. I don't know if they went on the map 5, but I think there's a chance. And it's really sad that Vegas could not capitalize because really New York were gift wrapping them this win. I don't really know how else to explain it with all this random experimenting going on and playing like trash. Vegas had every opportunity in the book to capitalize, but it felt like Dove was the only guy that wanted to do anything this series. He did everything he could. He was dragging his team, kicking and screaming to the finish line, but it's just not enough when it's him by himself. So really sad stuff. Vegas had a very interesting up and down week. They took their first map though, which is not something I was ready to say. I was not prepared to say that. Even against a team like New York, I expected them to get 3-0'd with how bad they looked. So hey, that's something that they can celebrate, I guess. A lot of people were wondering if they'd even take one map this entire season, so that's one very, very minuscule goal accomplished on the year, I suppose. But still, not a great look from them that they couldn't finish off this series, considering how badly New York were throwing. I think that's about enough of that, though. You get it. Vegas had a very interesting weekend with a ton of ups and downs and some interesting clown fiesta type of behavior thrown into the mix to make them a bit more fun to watch. Now, I think it'll be a good idea to move away from that and talk about something people were freaking out about, and that's Valiant versus Mayhem. Another bottom tier team, you know, the Valiant, they're commonly considered to be the second worst team in the West, only ahead of Vegas. But they really didn't look like it in the series against Mayhem, as it went the distance in a 5-map series. Not something you'd expect to see. This should be an easy 3-0 every day of the week for the Mayhem. Like, I'm not giving them any excuses here at all. They clearly underestimated their opponents and it nearly bit them. They had to really try hard in the second half of this series to turn it around and narrowly avoid a very bad disaster. But I'd want to give the Valiant some credit. Again, I don't think Mayhem deserve any excuses for having this be so close, but you got to give credit to the Valiant for playing their hearts out and kind of taking what was given to them in this series. I think that due to that lack of respect and maybe lack of preparation, the Valiant went out there, had fun, played some pressure-free Overwatch, and that's ultimately what makes them better than Vegas in a lot of ways. They go out there and just do their thing instead of seriously trying to impress everybody. They know not a lot of people care about them, and they're just going to do their thing, try and improve over time and prove the haters wrong in their own way without feeling like there's any pressure on them. And we saw that play out on Nepal, really. They 2-0'd the Mayhem on Nepal and honestly put on a pretty masterful performance. I was watching this again live during my co-stream with my chat, and I was very impressed with the execution on the side of the Los Angeles Valiant. Their rush comms with the Symmetra were incredibly impressive and very clean. You can tell they've been working hard to improve. Here's just a little sample if you missed the game, where their teleporter usage was very on point. CJ randomly, boop, he's there, and he gets a nice kill into RuPaul, and that was kind of what they were doing throughout this entire first section of the map. I felt like they did a very good job of navigating around the map and surprising the Mayhem by playing around those Seeker teleporters. And Seeker in general also played a great game. He carried like crazy to keep his team in this match, and he's a huge reason why they ended up taking 2 maps to begin with in a very close, hard-fought series. And I think part of the reason the Mayhem weren't ready for the Valiant is because Valiant might actually be improving to a certain extent. I heard Jake talk about this on broadcast, and he said that the Valiant are a team that people want to scrim. It's not like Vegas where people are genuinely uninterested. The Valiant are scrappy, they try hard, and they put up a good fight, so people are willing to scrim them. They think it's valuable to take a chance and play against a team that obviously looks a lot weaker on paper. That shows me this team is getting better pretty fast, and they've admitted it on social media. They're just going out there and trying their best. You know, they've only been a team for a couple of months now, really. They're very late to the party compared to everyone else. And they're slowly but surely getting better and building up that confidence, which makes it almost seem like eventually they're going to get a win, like not just against Vegas, against somebody else, which is very exciting stuff. They've already taken 3 maps in the last couple of weeks, 2 against the Mayhem, 1 against New York, and there's nowhere to go but up, like seriously. They're at the very bottom right now, and yet there's still a couple of tiers above a team like Vegas who have been established for a long time, so good on the Valiant for that regard. Seriously. They went out there and just pulled out all their tricks. They took risks, they did everything they could to catch the Mayhem off guard with some of their execution and strategies and plays, and it really did work. It was clean on Nepal. They did just enough on Shambali and Lijiang as well, even though they lost the map. I think they had some cool moments that are worth going for when you're a team that you know doesn't really have much of a chance on paper. I think that's it's kind of risk you have to take. You have to go out there and do some crazy unorthodox plays to try and beat a team like Mayhem. I gotta see if I can find it. This was like a big talk of this series. CJ doing this window right here, a lot of people disagreed with it and thought it was absolutely terrible. But I disagree. And I saw a lot of people online saying the same thing, where like it's mostly just a team thing, maybe just miscommunication on their end. And I kind of agree. I think that's the kind of play that you gotta go for against the Mayhem. Like, I think it's worth taking that risk. It didn't pay off in this time around, but, you know, if you change a couple of things, play a little bit smarter, maybe you do turn that fight or contest the point for a bit longer and find some picks. You gotta be risky. You're a bad team. Well, I shouldn't say a bad team. Well, you're not nearly as good as the Mayhem. You feel me? I think you have to go for this kind of stuff to try and give yourself the edge. You can't just be traditional and give your opponents respect. And that's why I like the Valiant and where they're headed right now, which is not something I thought I'd say, but here I am. That's why I like them. They don't give these teams respect. They're playing pressure-free Overwatch, and they're going out there and they're just punching above their weight. It's impressive. I don't know if this is going to be a consistent thing. Maybe later in the season it could be, but it's still really cool to see them putting up a fight and not just lying there and taking it. It seems that what we saw in the Pro-Am was a sign of things to come, so good on the Valiant. I'm pretty proud of them. That doesn't mean I'm going to support them again, but hey, good stuff from them. And again, with Mayhem, I don't really know what to think. They're shaky in this game. They shouldn't be shaky in this kind of matchup. There's really no excuse to almost lose to Valiant, even if they are better than we think. I'm really kind of curious on how the Mayhem play moving into these next couple of weeks. I don't know what to expect. They're kind of on the downward trend right now. Ever since that loss they had, they just haven't looked the same. Gladiators did something to them. Like, I know in the Defiant game they bounced back, but generally speaking, they've looked shaky since that matchup happened, even in the London series. So pay attention to the Mayhem and also the Valiant, I guess. I don't really know who the Valiant play from here. I mean, we can check real quick. I don't know if they play any winnable opponents. Toronto could be interesting with how they're struggling. Okay, Shock. That could be very fun if Shock continue to struggle, which we'll talk about in a few moments. So maybe Valiant can put up a fight and take maps against Shock. I mean, if New York can, maybe they can as well. Anyone else on here Valiant can maybe beat? So they have a week off. It looks like they have a week off in week 5. Is that all of their matches? It might be. Okay. So, yeah, maybe they won't be winning any games anytime soon until the second half of this stage, but still really cool stuff from them to put up a fight, and I'm excited to see if they can make some other teams sweat like they did with the Mayhem. Moving on, I wanted to quickly touch base on Reign versus Outlaws. This was the series that a lot of people were looking forward to this week. Obviously, a lot of these games were a lot closer than anticipated, but this was one people were excited for, and I'd say that it delivered. Aside from maybe, the map 5, the lack of map 5, I should say. Because, really, Outlaws and Reign traded blow for blow in a super close series, maybe outside of map 4, which was heavily Reign favored. But the other maps, they were going back and forth like juggernauts. Outlaws blew out Reign in the first map. They were looking good. Their support line was fragging out. They're not letting Lip do anything, and I appreciate the Outlaw strategy of really focusing Lip, not letting him build up those EMPs fast. That's usually what makes the Reign so threatening, when Lip can do what he wants. But Violet and Shu had their way with him, and Happy did a great job of being that proactive Sombra that you need to be against Lip. He forced him to change his playstyle, so I think it's pretty obvious the Outlaws did their homework into this matchup. Happy was looking for those translocators the entire time, making Lip's life a living nightmare. And the results show. Outlaws won this map with relative ease, and the Reign were not prepared for it. And at the start of Hollywood, it also seemed like the Reign were not going to be able to adjust, and Outlaws would be cruising to an easy 2-0 lead. But then something switched. Some kind of switch went off like this, boom, in the Reign's heads. They figured something out, and they put up a masterful defense on Hollywood to keep this series from getting out of hand. It felt like the Outlaws should have won this with how it started. Happy was hitting big shots. He was looking really good on that Ashe. But then the Reign started finding maybe a potential weak point. They started going for Pelican a lot. They were solo EMPing him. They were hard focusing him, I should say, and it worked. Taking that carry out of the fight was making the Outlaw struggle a bit more. Donghack was carrying on the Winston. Got to give him a lot of credit for going up against Fearless and holding his own. Like, seriously, I thought the focal point for Reign would be to abuse rush comms to beat the Outlaws who are more accustomed to the Winston stuff. But Reign matched, well, I should say more than matched on that dive composition. So good on them for taking it to the Outlaws on their big strong point and holding their own. So yeah, they tie up the series on Hollywood. Things are looking really good. You don't know what's going to happen. Then Junkertown happens, and again, it's this crazy back and forth. Seems like the Outlaws might get held on point A. Seems like the Reign might get held on point A. They just barely move on over to the finish line. And in the last fire, one of the last fights, Lips just had this crazy turning point of the match, I'd say, where he managed to assassinate Pelican out of nowhere. At least I think it was Pelican, if I remember correctly. And that's where it kind of ended. Rain kind of built up their ultimate economy for the final fight, were able to push through, and at that point, the Outlaws were maybe a little boomed. I think losing 2 very winnable maps in a row like that, and what could have been a 3-0 for them, boomed their mental. They couldn't adjust. The Rain ended up winning, and that was that. Very easily could have won to a map 5 if the execution was slightly better from the Outlaws on either map 2 or 3. So big credit to them. It's obvious right now the Rain and the Outlaws are the 2 best teams in the West. There's no debating it right now. They're by far the best 2 teams. No one can keep up with them. The only teams that are a match for them are each other right now, it seems. But really, the reason the Rain are showing they're the best right now, aside from Lip being a maniac and the crazy follow-up from Stalker and Chio and just the amazing individuals, is the fact that their mid-game adjustments were so good in this series. Again, Outlaws looked like they were in control in the first map, and for a good amount of Hollywood, they seemed like they had the Rain figured out, but something about those in-game adaptations just came in clutch for them. They figured out weak points really fast, figured out what the problem was. You see Lip destroying his translocators because Happy's actively looking for him. He adjusted his playstyle, forcing Happy and the Outlaws to adjust their playstyle, and it worked in the Rain's favor. They are showing right now that their coaching and their guys are extremely intelligent. Those types of mid-game adaptations are the things that win you championships. So really impressive stuff from the Rain early on in this season, and good on them from establishing themselves as the obvious best team in, I'd say, the entire league. Just gonna take a quick sip of water. Okay, so that takes care of that. Pretty fun game all around. I enjoyed that one. It was a gigabanger. Next, we got to talk about the Shock, though. I think it's about time we bring up the guys who are massively disappointing most fans in the league right now, even some of their own, with how they're looking. The Shock are currently 1-3 on the season, and they very well, could have been 0-4 if New York Excelsior didn't choke. We're in a world where the Shock could have started off 0-4 for the first time ever, or maybe the second time ever. I don't remember what happened in Stage 1 2018, but needless to say, it's been a long time since they've had a poor record like this. It's been quite some time. And the play from them has been pretty uninspiring. Really. Defiant almost beat them, New York almost beat them, and then they got blown out in their other games against Rain and Justice. The execution has not been there. It's been very unclean. They've been frantic. They're not on the same page. The communication isn't there. A lot of their guys are making silly individual errors in all of these matches, and it often feels like it is on proper. Still, after all this time, with all these adjustments with this new team, it's still all on proper to win them games, and occasionally their tank line as well. I think their tanks have played decently, especially Junbin, but I digress, as the entire emphasis of this offseason was to give Proper a better team, so it didn't feel like he was the only guy doing things. But here in 2023, so far through 4 games, it still feels like nothing's changed, which is incredibly sad. Now, I don't know how many more excuses we can give to the Shock at this point, and that's the worrying thing in this regard. Part of me feels like we're still overreacting to them, but at the same time, it's been more than a couple of weeks now. You know, they had an off week to adjust. They played 4 games, and they still look shaky. They still can't seem to figure something out. Now, I've heard from rumors that apparently they still don't have an actual practice facility, even though they're in the US now. I don't know how true that stuff is, so don't quote me on that, but that could be part of the reason why they still don't look comfortable. Maybe they're not in a comfortable environment and they're giga stressed. I mean, they've been stressed even before they made it to the United States. When they were in APAC still, you know, for the Pro-Am, when they were still in Korea, I should say, they were very stressed out because they still weren't in the US. And that stress might be getting to them along with the overwhelming expectations put on their shoulders this year. I don't really know what the answer is. I don't. It could be that there are some excuses, but there could be nothing at all, and it could just be that they're having issues as a squad. They're stressed. They're having a hard time adjusting. Maybe they can't get used to Krusty as their new coach. They're having a hard time figuring out his style and what he wants. I don't know exactly what the problem is, but there's a lot of disorganization going on with Shock. Like, take this Justice game, for example. This was a blowout. This really was not a close series in the slightest. Shock were struggling right out of the gates. They almost took Lijiang, but Vindame sadly died on like the last fight, and they got outplayed by Ben Best and those guys. And then the rest of the series was just the Alpha Yi show. Alpha was crushing them on Hollywood. Shock couldn't get anything going. And then that carried into Rialto. It seemed like they had a good chance to win that map. They held Justice and I believe Point B. They couldn't finish that section of the map. But then Shock proceeded to get full held. Like, I don't think I could see the statistics with like kills and everything. But it felt like Proper was the only guy killing anything at all. Really. Heesang was struggling. Vindame was like making some really dumb mistakes. He's been looking like that for the most part since the start of the season, even in the Pro-Am. It has not improved. I don't know why coaching can't get to him right now, but he's got stuff to work on. Finn's been randomly getting picked off. Sometimes the tanks overextend. Heesang's not popping off as hard as you'd like him to consistently. You have Proper and Heesang flip-flopping on DPS at random times. Heesang's supposed to be the Sombra. We see Proper on the Sombra sometimes. And sometimes we see Heesang on the Tracer instead. Like, all these weird changes going on within the DPS line doesn't help either in terms of comfort. The Shock are just in discourse right now. They're trying to get comfortable. You can tell that there's just something missing, and that's why I'm not ready to give up on the Shock completely. I do think that heading into these next few weeks, there really are no excuses. They've got to execute, otherwise they really are overhyped. But right now, from what I've seen, like, I don't know. I feel like there's just something in their heads that's blocking them from playing the game to their fullest potential, if you know what I mean. Because what we saw in the New York game is just even more evident. You get blown out by the Justice, who are a decent team, but they shouldn't be destroying the Shock like that. But then you nearly lose to NYXL, and it takes a reverse sweep to win this series and narrowly avoid complete and utter disaster with a really terrible start to your season. You nearly went 0-4. Or not 0-4. Wait, did I say they were 1-3 before? I meant they're 2-2. I'm sorry if I said they're 1-3. Anyway, you nearly start your season off 1-3. The first part of the map on Nepal isn't close, and then King's Row is close, but you can't quite deliver. You see the mistakes coming in. Like, I don't really know. What I saw in the first half of this series was not very Shock-like at all. It looked just like in the Washington series. And even in Havana, it still didn't feel like they were winning. Really, it felt more like New York lost that than them winning it, as stupid as that sounds, as Shock probably should have gotten 3-0'd. It took a egregious C9 and Kellen shattering literally nothing for the Shock to stay alive and completely turn this series on its head, as the rest of the series was New York just completely choking. On Lijiang, the execution was bad, and they decided to play Fitz on support on New Queen Street, and they got snowballed. Like, Fitz looked horrible yet again on the Ana. Not his fault, but still, that's the Changgun crackpot for you. Shouldn't be surprised at this point. But again, the real turning point of this series has to be Havana. I'll show you right now. So, yeah. That, if my friends, if you didn't watch, is why things became a disaster so quickly. Man shattered a wall, just completely misses this big Ramatra in his face. But then it gets worse. Everyone's fighting in this room. They desperately want to kill Max. And if they do kill him, they probably have a shot of holding this and winning the map right here. There's no guarantee, but it's looking good. You know, they have some ultimates on the board. But they overextend, and there's no one on the cart. Why is there absolutely no one here? Why is everyone just completely tunnel visioned on this room? There's like 3 Shock members on the cart, and everyone was looking at Max. That's just a bad miscommunication error, and again, probably costed the NYXL potential 3-0 against Shock, and a chance to move up to 3-3 on their season with a good chance of making the knockouts. Like, that's just an absolute tragedy. This is the thing that lost them the series. This horrible C9. One of the worst we've seen in a very long time. So yeah, Shock fans, I'd be pretty nervous right now. You're really lucky you won that New York series. You should probably be 1-3 right now, if I'm being honest with you. I'm a little worried about them. I don't know, man. I shouldn't even say a little worried. I'm very worried about them. They just seem stressed, like something's missing. Something's missing, and they're not playing like the O2 Blast that we are accustomed to seeing, or that we saw dominate contenders for like a year and a half, give or take. It's not the same team. Again, it feels like Proper's the only guy doing anything. He's the only consistent member on this team, aside from like Junbin and Max sometimes. Krusty's got to get back in the lab and figure something out with those guys, because if this keeps up, they could be one of the biggest disappointments in Overwatch League history. I don't want to overreact too much, because deep down I really feel like there's just something wrong internally. I don't know for certain, maybe someone else has an answer, but I feel like something's wrong and it's preventing them from playing at their full potential, but that could also be copium, so really watch out for the Shock super carefully. Their week off already happened, so after this nightmare of a week, they're diving straight into some pretty important games here in week 4. If I remember correctly, they play Outlaws and Mayhem, I want to say? No, Valiant, excuse me. So they have one big game against the Outlaws. They should probably beat Valiant, but I don't know. We talked about that earlier. Valiant might be able to scare them if the Shock continue to go down this road. But Outlaws, for example, I don't know how they're going to do in that one. Outlaws are obviously in a lot better of a situation right now, and there's a good chance they could get 3-0'd in this one too. Even if they don't win this series, what we need to see from Shock heading into week 4 is a lot more fight. They need to look more like that contender that we expected to see during the preseason. If they can't show us anything, they're in grave danger of maybe missing out on the knockouts or bare minimum having a low seed. Because if they end up 3-3, let's say, after week 4, that gives a lot of teams opportunities to jump up over them. You don't know how Defiant will respond. They might be able to play better. Teams like Gladiators and the Titans, Justice, they could probably keep their positions high. They probably will make the knockouts, I feel like, in the end, because like London or New York will probably fall off. Maybe Defiant sneak in, but I feel like Shock should get in, but they might be a very low seed, and they might just get knocked out by like Houston or Florida round 1, and that's it. That'll be all she wrote. And they might completely miss out on going into Korea, which would be a big-time disappointment considering what we expected from them during the preseason. So yeah, watch out for the Shock very carefully, ladies and gentlemen. I am pretty worried about them, as should you be. It's different like when they're off to those slow starts that we've seen in the past, where they like maybe lose a couple games in a row, then figure it out. This is a different situation as they've struggled for multiple weeks on end with a week off in between. So keep your eyes peeled, ladies and gentlemen, for what comes next for the Shock. They could be in grave danger of having a very drastically different season than anticipated. Speaking of the Shock and some of the teams they played, I definitely wanted to touch base a bit more on Justice and NYXL before we move into the East. Starting with the Justice, I guess, some talks maybe have to be had about if they're a potential dark horse mid-season madness contender. I just showed you the standings a second ago. I can bring it back up. They're currently sitting at 4-2 with a +5 map differential. They have 2 games left to go, and they very well could be like 6-2 or 5-3, which would give them one of the better seeds most likely for the mid-season madness knockouts. We can check who they play real quick just to kind of get an idea of what their trajectory is. I don't think they have a... Yeah, no, they play NYXL and Gladiators, which are both fairly winnable, I'd say. Gladiators are a good team. That'll be a challenge, but they've shown us they can keep pace with a team of that level, especially if Alpha Yi and Flora are feeling themselves. Anything's possible there, so that's a big matchup they could win in a couple of weeks. And they also play New York, who, while I do think are maybe getting a little better, are probably a team they beat with relative ease. So in all likelihood, Justice get 5 or 6 wins to start their season and would probably be blowing away expectations at that point as one of the higher seeds and would be in a great position to maybe make the playoffs in general this year. So the talk has to be had, though. Can they possibly make it through the knockouts and end up in Korea? Because the West has multiple spots up for grabs. It's not just these 2. There's a couple of others. And the Justice feel like a team that could dangerously sneak up on some people. A lot of these teams in the West, outside of like Atlanta and Houston, feel pretty vulnerable. Like, there's a world where they could beat Boston. There's a world where they could maybe upset Florida based off of what we saw last week. There's a world where they could beat Shock again, where they could beat Titans, where they could beat Gladiators. Right now, it feels like Justice can beat most teams in this kind of circle, if you will, of that midseason madness qualified cutoff, which is amazing. This is the stuff you want to see. The expectations weren't super high. Even if you thought Justice would be better than most people would, you probably didn't expect them to be like this high up right now or in a position to be this high. And I think, again, it has to do with alexyOWL and him continuing to rise to a higher and higher level status as a star. I was actually talking about this with Avril on Twitter earlier today, how a lot of people maybe don't recognize what alexyOWL is doing, and, you know, they think he's only now just becoming good, and they don't realize what he did last year. But I think a big part of why he's suddenly rising to stardom in the West is because not a lot of people were paying attention to him in the Spark back then, especially the Western fans, when he was always doing pretty well next to Shy, which is a testament to how good he is if he can partially share the spotlight with Shy. And now that he's gone from Shy, he has a big-time chance to be the #1 star and playmaker and leader on his team, and so far he has capitalized. And he's played at that like superstar level that you need to be a dark horse contender. And along with the resurgence of Flora, and with the resurgence of Ben Best, and Mirror's decent play, and Terra's aggressive nature, the Justice are a scary team, even for some of the best teams in the league, and they deserve a lot of credit for that. I think they are someone you have to watch out for. They're well coached, they have good playmakers, they want this badly. Sorry if you hear my dog barking in the background. The Justice have all the tools they need to potentially make it to Korea and be a dark horse contender. I'm not expecting them to get by some of the best teams, even from like the East or the West, doesn't really matter. But I think the point we have to make is there's a chance that they could make it past all of these teams and go to Korea. That's the big theme to take away with Justice right now. I can see a world where they get in, where they break through with their consistent play. They've gotten blown out in a couple of games, like that Boston game's a little upsetting. But when they're feeling it, they can be very dangerous. I don't know if this Shock game is a real testament to how they're playing. I'd like to think part of it is that they capitalized and played this well against them, but you never really know. I think Justice have what it takes, though. I do. They're not the best, but certainly not the worst. NYXL. Are they better than we think? That's the big question that I want to talk about with them as we move on from Washington. Because I've been hearing a lot of people on social media saying that New York are underrated and they're improving fast. And sorry, New York fans, but I don't know if I agree with that. Like, they're 10-14 in maps, which is cool and all, but they haven't done all that much to impress me, really, based off of who they've beaten so far in the season. They've beaten Vegas and the Valiant, who you should be beating. You nearly beat the Shock, but you didn't. I don't know how impressive it is to beat the Shock in their current state because of all the weirdness going on with them. So what if New York really accomplished outside of that? What makes people think they are this underrated team that's going to sneak up on some people and possibly make it to Korea? I just don't see it. Like, I don't know if they beat Washington or Vancouver, to be completely honest with you. Like, just look at their scores. Like, maybe the Defiant game is evidence that they're getting stronger, but Defiant also might be struggling right now based off of their results this season. Shock and Defiant are both in weird spots. Those are like the only two real teams they put up a fight against, and both of them aren't even in the best of places. They're not playing at their fullest potential. So I don't know if it's just the competition playing down to them or New York really playing better than we think, just based off of the execution and occasionally dropping maps to teams that they shouldn't, like the Valiant. And with Vegas, nearly losing to Vegas, there's a world where they could have lost that series. I just don't know what to make of it. I can't make heads or tails of it. Like, this experimentation with fits on support weirds me out. It's such a dumb Changoon strategy that doesn't make any sense, that I shouldn't be running. It just disrupts the chemistry of the team in my eyes. And there's also these weird mistakes they make with Kellen and some of his decision making. Main support play being inconsistent, especially in the Brigitte. Not having fits on the DPS, I think, makes them weaker too. Him and Psycho are a great pairing. I think they should be in together most of the time, if not at all times. I don't know. Maybe I'm just dumb. Maybe I'm just not giving them enough credit. You'll have to let me know what you think in the comments below. But I haven't seen any reason to suggest that they truly are a team on the rise right now, just based off of circumstances alone. If they put up a good fight against Justice in Vancouver in a couple of weeks, then yeah, maybe we have to start to have that conversation. But right now, here in the present, I'm still not that impressed with them, based off of their weird choices and the fact that while they did almost beat the Shock, they still almost lost to Vegas at the same time. You can't tell me they're improving steadily when they're playing against Vegas Eternal and dropping maps to them. There's never a reason to be dropping a map to Vegas ever right now in their current state. So I don't know how any New York fan can sit there with a straight face and tell me they're on the rise and they are clearly improving. Like, I don't see it. I'm not trying to be a hater. I'm just saying I haven't seen the evidence. I haven't seen that flash that makes me say, oh yeah, this team is someone we have to take more seriously now. No, I think they're taking what's given to them, and then they're underperforming in other cases. So give it another couple of weeks, and if they make the knockouts, let's say, let's see how they do in that round, as there's a good chance they'll play against some better competition. So for now, we got to leave New York where they are, okay? I don't think it's worth giving them a ton of credit when everyone's beating the Shock right now or making it close with them and losing to Vegas in at least one map. I'm not going to do it. Sorry. That's about all I got to say in terms of NYXL, though. I think I covered basically all of the big headlines for the Western Conference this week. This idea of Vegas and their circus, Valiant playing better than we think, a situation where you might actually have to give some credit to a bad team. Mayhem may be in a weird spot, looking vulnerable. Rain and Outlaws looking like the best teams in the West. Justice maybe being a dark horse. Shock struggling. New York may be on the rise, maybe not. Those are probably the big takeaways from the West. The other teams, it's not that interesting, like London, for example. They've kind of stagnated. So we'll move on to the West, where things are still as unpredictable as ever. They're not going to let the West one-up them in that regard, as a lot of these results were pretty interesting. And I think the big theme from this week has got to be the Seoul Infernal, who pull out the 2-0 record from the week and take down both Zhou teams, if you will, Guangzhou Charge and Hangzhou Spark. Not something that I expected to see based off of their shaky start to the season and just how good the Charge and Spark have been thus far. I'm impressed, man. Infernal are gaining confidence at a relatively high rate. And I think a big reason for that is the execution's looking better, and maybe we have to start thinking in that week one, maybe they were just nervous in that loss to Dynasty and they let stage fright get the best of them. Maybe they got that out of their system and they're now playing like the team that was supposedly looking really good in scrims. Maybe the scrim results are looking a lot better and they're finally making that scrim result translate into big wins. That's probably where we're at right now. They got their choke and their shakiness out early, and now they look confident, and that confidence is translating into good performances on stage. Like in the Guangzhou game, it was very back and forth. I think there's a world where Charge do win that game, but I'd say generally Seoul Infernal were the better team throughout this series. That's how I felt when watching it. Even though the Charge were winning maps and they had them on match point up 2-1, I still felt like Infernal were the better team with my eyes. This felt like a trap game to me, and I'm really upset that I didn't pick Infernal now. I believe it was Yiska on Twitter saying that you gotta believe in the Scrim Bucks. Infernal are going 2-0 this week, and he was right. Credit where it's due. Those Scrim Bucks are indeed legit. Seoul Infernal are looking clean. Not like a title contender right now, of course, but MN3 and Zest doing their thing, and more importantly, Mag is absolutely popping off. In this Charge series, he was the difference maker, and probably the best performance I've seen from him maybe ever in his Overwatch League career, if not since like his rookie season. I think I have the clip here. This is when he won Player of the Match against Guangzhou Charge, and he was a menace. He was the reason they end up winning this game alongside MN3, who, credit goes where it's due, also had a ridiculous game. But Mag was finding some excellent results on this Wrecking Ball. He was causing the Charge a lot of trouble. Maybe they weren't ready for it. His Winston also looked incredibly impressive, and he was outplaying Piggy, who we'd been talking about last week as this absolute giga chat of a guy who's looking much improved. Mag outplayed him. He was the better player in this series. He was causing all sorts of disruptions with the DPS and the back line. His juggles were nasty on Monkey. These minefields were good. Let me see if I can find some Winston highlights. Oh, this is another rollout. Insane rollout with the minefield. Crazy stuff. Xerneas dies. Xerneas maybe got caught out a bit with some overextensions in this series. That was a good weakness Infernal exploited. But yeah, in this map 5, he came to play in the Rhine and the Monkey. Really. I love the way he played in this series. I had a lot of doubts about Mag coming into this season, and right now he's showing that maybe he just needed to get out of Washington. Maybe that was the key for him to unlock that potential from the runaway days that we talked about so long ago. These ball stats are pretty absurd. 20 final blows to 3 deaths, 40 eliminations. and this is like in 10 minutes or whatever it was, or I think it was however amount on Blizzard World, however much he played ball on Blizzard World, like absolutely insane stuff out of him. But yeah, him and MN3 took over that game against Guangzhou and ultimately made it winnable. MN3 was like playing mental, and that's the kind of player he is, right? That's the kind of stuff that he brings to the table. He has those dominant games. We saw it last year. We're seeing it again this year. Him and Zester are just a nasty combo. Skewed's getting along with this team as well. He's been a very good fit for them. Seoul Infernal are finding their groove, and ultimately, due to their great push this week, going 2-0, including a 3-0 against the Spark, now they are currently second place in the East and are on their lonesome, I believe, on one part of the bracket, with Dallas Fuel being like their biggest threat, or maybe O2 Blast. Like, they got separated from Guangzhou Charge and Hangzhou Spark as the second seeded team, Guangzhou first seed, Spark third. Like, this is huge for them to be separated from their two biggest threats and have a pretty easy path, I'd say, potentially, to making it to Korea. Well, I mean, they're already in Korea, but you get what I mean. The LAN tournament for Midseason Madness. Their path is pretty cut and dry, and they have a lot of forward momentum right now. And we start to kind of have this conversation on if they truly are the best team in APAC, or if they're just hot at the right time. Because they beat the Spark and the Charge, who are clearly the two best performers heading into that week, I'd say they probably are the best team right now. They're at least the hottest. They have the most confidence. They beat both of those teams. So I'm liking Infernal's odds of maybe being the best representation for the East heading into Midseason Madness. Because in the Spark game, they looked damn good. They improved as time went on. Like, the Charge game was close and hard fought, but they looked prepared for the Spark game. They had it, man. They took advantage of Shy maybe not being that comfortable in the Sombra role, and they ran away with it. There were some close moments here and there, but it was taking Spark everything they had to stay in this series. Mag's flexibility showed out, and the DPS did the rest. Very impressive stuff from the Infernal, I gotta say. They surprised me. I saw, the potential. I talked about it in my prediction video last week. I saw the upset potential in both games. I didn't want to risk it because Infernal are one of those teams that could choke just because of what their franchise is, the Philly Fusion back in the day. They're known for choking these opportunities away. Wasn't really sure if I should trust them. Decided not to, and I regret it. I almost picked them to win against Spark in a 3-2. I decided not to. Didn't trust them. Felt like the Spark were the better team, and I paid for it. So I admit defeat, Infernal. You probably are the best team in the East right now, but given that the best team in the East changes like every single week, I don't really know how much that means. But good for you, Infernal. You played very well, and I'm excited to see where you can go from here. This is the kind of forward momentum you need to take the lead and run away with things in the Eastern Conference. So good job, guys. You're looking real good. You're looking real scary, and I'm excited. I'm very excited. I'm glad to see them doing this to maybe finally break the curse and not be a disappointment. But of course, Infernal/Philly fans that have been longtime fans won't get their hopes up. Aside from that, Spark looked a bit more shaky. Charge also looked a bit more shaky, as you can see by the score lines. They both took 1 L this week. Charge also dropped a match to Dragons, surprisingly. Well, map, I should say. So maybe a bit of a regression going on. The hot streak's finally over. They're coming back down to earth a little bit. Every week feels different in the East, but that's just the feeling I'm getting right now. They had their great start. They had their time in the spotlight, and now they're slowly starting to go down. And we're going to have to see if they can move it back up or not. Jimmy and Choi still look really good. I have confidence they can. But that Infernal loss probably shook them up a little bit. And with Spark, I'm starting to wonder if they're in the right meta to be that best team in the East. That's a lot of, the conversation people are going to be having in the East along with Infernal in Charge is this idea if Spark really are as good as we think they are. I'd like to think they are. They have the skill set. They have their amazing DPS line. They have the potential. It just seems like meta might be the thing that defines their season. That's something I kind of always thought to a certain extent. But just given their power, I thought they'd be able to get through this. But a hard Sombra meta is giving them some trouble. Shy's not the worst Sombra in the world, but I think it's clearly not within his total realm of comfort. He'd much rather be on an Ashe or a Sojourn. And the fact that he can't is maybe hindering the Spark's full potential. It's not just on Shy, don't get me wrong, but obviously having him in his full comfort zone helps a lot when he's popping off and doing his thing. Him and Leave can just become this sick 1-2 punch. But with hard Sombra meta, being enforced right now, excuse me. I don't know if the Spark have what it takes to even make it through this tournament, this knockout portion, to get on over to the tournament in a couple of weeks. I don't know if they have it in them, folks. I don't know. I don't know if they get by the charge. I'd expect them to be fine against like Dynasty and the contenders teams they might have to play. But I don't know if they can beat Guangzhou Charge, man. I think in theory, playing against Charge gives them a better chance, as Charge aren't as loving of the Sombra compared to some of these other APAC teams. But Spark feel pretty convinced it's something they have to play. Coach RUI, excuse me, loves his Sombra, always has since the Chengdu days, so it's something they're probably going to continue to play. So I'm curious to see if they can make the proper adjustments, clean up their coordination, and look more comfortable out there, and depend on other guys not named Shy and leave. That's going to be the big key for them. So yeah, right now Spark on a bit of a downward trend. I do think if Sombra gets knocked out of the meta, we'll see their stocks rise up. But for now, they have a big challenge in front of them with the Guangzhou Charge. I don't know if they play them next week, but very soon they'll play them in this knockout portion. So look out for that. And I think that's basically everything, right? I talked about Infernal, Spark, and Charge. I mean, I guess we could also talk about Dallas. That's like the other interesting team in the East right now. You're gonna hear my dog barking, by the way. I apologize for that. Dallas Fuel had a bit of a bounce back week, finally getting some wins on the board after starting their season off 0-3, the defending champs, finally getting some Ws, beating the Shanghai Dragons, beating the Seoul Dynasty, winning both of those games convincingly, but not in the prettiest of fashions. That's my one issue. There was some good in both series for sure. On the Seoul Dynasty series, they were able to full hold on Blizzard World. They got a pretty easy dub there, mostly in control on Oasis. But they did slip at times throughout this series. And in the Shanghai game, I think a lot of people can agree they were pretty sloppy. Hollywood was bad. Junkertown, they looked good, but there's still some ups and downs. You can tell they're in the process of making those adjustments and getting back on track to what we're used to. They're experimenting, putting Hanbin on the Winston a bit more again. They're embracing that Junker Queen composition. Edison's popping off a bit more. Sparkle looks a bit more comfortable. Dallas are maybe finding a bit of a groove, but considering that they played the Shanghai Dragons in the Seoul Dynasty and they actually dropped a map to Seoul, I don't really know if I'm all that ready to say that they're improving and that they're going to be more of a contender like we hoped at the beginning of this season. Dynasty and Dragons have by far been the worst teams in the East. They each have one win apiece right now and have been by far none a worse performer than everyone else generally. They look a lot more confused than everyone else in the league. So how does Dallas respond? How do they build momentum moving forward? How do they continue to evolve their play style and change up their composition when needed? How much do they embrace the Winston comp when you have Hanbin there? How much do you embrace the anti-Winston stuff? How much Sombra do you play? How much do you avoid that stuff when you can? These are big question marks, and Rush is someone who likes to kind of play the unorthodox. He knows how to take care of disadvantages. We've seen it in the past. So that's going to be the thing to look out for as they end up playing most likely against Seoul Infernal at some point. I don't really think they'll lose to Sin Prisa or Shanghai. I suppose they could, but how they play against Infernal is going to be very important when they do meet them, or if they do meet them, I should say, in the Eastern knockouts next week or the week after, whenever it is. I don't really know. Eddie and Sparkle, I don't know if they can handle MN3 and Zest. I don't know if they can match up against the power of Mag and his flexibility. I think there's a lot more heroes in his realm of comfort compared to Hanbin right now. Dallas have a lot to prove still, but I'm glad that they are showing some improvement. Finally, over time, starting to show that, they're still here. They have a pulse. They're showing that next week in the decent fight they put up maybe wasn't a fluke. I'm happy that they're showing some improvement at the very least. I think that's the important thing to take away if you're a Dallas fan. Finally, you got those wins. That goes a long way in building your confidence, but there's still a long, long road ahead of you. So yeah, I think that's where I'm at. Dallas, I have a lot of questions for. I'm not convinced of them. I'm not totally convinced of Spark right now in this meta. Charge are maybe still a little inconsistent. Infernal are the hot team right now, but you never know when they're going to choke. East is such an interesting bonanza. Every week, I do not know what to expect. Like, usually the East booms me, but this might be the most boomed I've ever been from this region before in my entire life. The East is very, very confusing. And right now, it feels like there's a couple of teams that you could consider to be the best team in that region. It almost feels like it's based on the week. Infernal, I guess according to the scrims and how they've played during this previous week, it suggests that they're probably the best team in the region. But you never know what's going to happen in these next few weeks. That's the stupid thing about Infernal and with Charge and Spark. It's anyone can take on any one type of region unless you're Dragons or Dynasty or Fuel, I suppose. It's a 3-team race. That's how I see it. And yeah, that's basically it in terms of my thoughts on week 3. But something else we have to discuss is what's to come heading into week 4. For starters, like I was saying before, we have Eastern Knockout starting. Contenders teams finally getting into the mix. We're going to see a Contenders matchup between Shanghai and Sin Prism, Rhodes versus Seoul Dynasty, O2 Blast is a team to watch for, Panthera's fun. A lot of these Contenders teams, man, they have a lot of familiar names and exciting up-and-coming players. They could shake things up. I'm not expecting any of them to be God tier. I'm going to talk about them in a future video very soon, so stay tuned. But there's a chance they could surprise some people, especially O2. I think they could do some serious damage and they could beat like a Shanghai or a Seoul maybe. Or maybe even like Dallas Fuel if they're having a bad day. I could see a world where it's possible, which is what makes it so interesting and what makes it so much fun to look forward to, I'd say. So yeah, we have Contenders teams, the beginning of the knockouts, which I believe are going to last a couple of weeks in the East. It'll be week 4 and week 5 from the looks of it. I don't know if they'll be done by week 6. I'd assume so. Nope, they're doing week 6 as well. So there's going to be knockouts for 3 straight weeks in the East. It is a crazy gauntlet that is ahead of us. It's like only going to be weekend games for the most part. But yeah, we got a lot to look forward to over there. Knockouts are going to last ages, as there are 12 teams technically competing, thanks to the Contenders teams. So yeah, we're entering a new era for the Overwatch League with Contenders teams taking on Eastern teams. Make sure to watch out for that. I feel like probably nothing surprising will happen, but with how the East has been so far, I wouldn't leave it up to chance. I wouldn't say anything set in stone. It's going to be a good time. I'm pretty pumped for that. I'd assume that the teams making it out of the knockouts are going to be Charge and Seoul Infernal. That would be my guess. Maybe my mind will change throughout this week, but that's kind of where I'm leaning towards right now. I don't see any sort of major upsets happening with the top teams, maybe some in the lower brackets, but that's about as far as I'll go there. And also, on the other side of things, not to leave out the West, they also are in a pretty interesting spot heading into week 4. A lot of things are going to clear up with the standings and who makes the tournament and where teams stand after the end of week 4. You know, it's going to be very important for a team, like I said, like the Shock or Gladiator, some of these 2-2 teams to move forward and get some of those W's needed to stay on top. You have the Boston Uprising finally getting to play again after getting destroyed by the Vancouver Titans. You have to wonder where their mental is at and how they perform when they play Toronto Defiant. Well, not so much Vegas Eternal, but how they play against Toronto Defiant. How do they bounce back from that kind of stuff? Where's their mental currently at? Are they still the same team? Are they boomed? Are they not? It's a good question to ask yourself. Who else? I think that's basically it. Washington Justice, like I said before, in week 5. Any other big teams in week 4 that need to prove themselves? London and Vancouver, really important weeks for them. Like, Shock, Outlaws have a chance to firmly establish a lead to potentially get one of the top seeds to automatically qualify for the midseason madness. Them in Florida, I'd say, are probably neck and neck. It's going to be really close. I don't know if they play each other. That'd be helpful if they did. I don't know if they do, unfortunately. I want to say they do. I don't know, though. Oh, they do. Yes. Okay, so this game in week 5, so not this week, but the week after, could be the deciding factor in who likely joins the Atlanta Reign for that guaranteed spot and avoiding that knockout tournament altogether. And along with that, we can see who's boomed, who's not, and if teams like San Francisco can prove themselves and get better and not be totally washed like a lot of people are already assuming. That's what's important to know, I'd say, heading into week 4. You have your Eastern knockout starting with contenders teams, and then in the West, you have teams trying to establish a firm lead and avoid specific narratives. You have 2 teams automatically qualifying out of the West. You have 2 teams in the East, but there is no automatic qualification. You got to play through the knockouts to get there. So that's where we're at. Both the East and West have very fun storylines. We're going to see who stays alive, who dies here, whose hopes and dreams get crushed, and we'll go from there. But yeah, that basically concludes my thought process on week 3, ladies and gentlemen, and where I'm at heading into week 4 and beyond. I do hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope that it was as good as the first one. I'm not really sure. You guys will have to let me know. This time I went a bit more off script. I didn't have nearly as many talking points lined up. I kind of just went with the flow. You have to let me know what you think of that down in the comments below. Should I keep it how I have it right now, or should I make adjustments? Let me know your thoughts down below. If you enjoyed it, I'd appreciate it if you give this video a like, subscribe to the channel for more podcast episodes like this and other Overwatch League content. And until next time, guys, I'm out of here. Peace.